Hello and welcome to Learning Music with Pat. As I said last time, I was going to answer a question that a woman asked me about sanitizing instruments. I'm fortunate and feel blessed because I've taught both children and adults in single lessons, private lessons, and I've also taught in a classroom situation. Each one presents its challenges, but what I wanted to focus on today and what the lady asked me was, how do you keep instruments sanitized? If you're teaching classes of music and you're going from one class to another class to another class, and the children are using all the same instruments because the music that you're teaching is the same, how do you keep things clean enough? Now, it's easy enough to disinfect an instrument, but when you've got 10 children in a class all day long and the classes are continually changing, how do you make sure that things are sanitary enough for them? Kids come in with colds, kids come in coughing and sneezing. You never know what they've had to eat. You never know if they have a sore throat. Sometimes they sneeze, put their hands up to their mouth, and then it's back on an instrument again, spreading germs everywhere. So it really is important for both yourself as a single individual to disinfect your instrument every so often, because it should be done even if you're the only one playing it, and also important to know how to do it in a classroom situation. I have a few rules that I go by that are a help. For one thing, when I'm ordering instruments for a class or for a school, I do not order wood unless it's an instrument that does not go in the mouth. It's very, very difficult to sanitize wood. So therefore, I order basically plastic and metal, and then you can disinfect those rather easily. When I disinfect an instrument, I use rubbing alcohol and a soft cloth. You can also get the little packets that have alcohol in them, like these. You just rip them open. It's it's the swabs. All you do is rip the thing open, and there's a little bit of gauze in there, and it's soaked with alcohol. But these are small, and if you're going to be disinfecting a lot of instruments, you're going to use an awful lot of these. So I recommend that you just get yourself a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a soft cloth. Now, I like to use a washcloth because it's a little thicker. It's thicker than this, and you can cut it to size. I don't like to use anything big. I like to use a small square, and I usually end up by cutting up a washcloth. And then I put the correct amount of alcohol on it and just rub down the instrument. Now, you may have quite a few instruments to rub down. I like to, because of the number of students in your class, I like to disinfect an instrument twice. I like to disinfect it right after students have played, right after, and then again before the next class comes in. So they're actually disinfected twice before a student plays them. And then you have to use enough alcohol so that it will be a little bit soppy, not terrible, but a little bit soppy to get everything disinfected. And you also need to give enough time for the instrument to dry. Rubbing alcohol evaporates quickly, so you don't have to wait too long before it's dry enough for another student to take the instrument and play it. But I like to have it completely dry because I don't want the alcohol getting into the student's mouth. That's something that I just don't approve of, and it tastes awful anyway. So I would let the instrument dry completely before the next student takes it. That means I might have to stop a class a little bit before the bell to give the students a chance to get me the instruments so I can disinfect them. Now, I can teach students how to do it. It's not all that difficult. I'll be showing you today how to do it. But you have to really supervise if your students are going to do it, because they get careless. If they don't see a germ, it doesn't exist. If they sneeze, so what? The germs have gone somewhere, and they're just careless about it. I think it's important that parents teach children at home the importance of cleanliness, washing your hands, using alcohol on the instrument, disinfecting it every so often, if you're playing the instrument by yourself and nobody else is using it, you don't have to disinfect it every time that you use it. But if you have a classroom situation and students are going in and out all day long, you've got to disinfect every time a student uses it. And the other thing I want to mention while I think of it, don't use paper towels to do it. Because what happens with toweling, it may be convenient. You sop it up with the rubbing alcohol, rub it all over, and then toss it away. You wouldn't want to have students get rubbing alcohol, say they grab a paper towel from the wastebasket for whatever reason, then they rub their eyes and something. I mean, that would be awful. So you want to have it done by cloth and not by paper. The other thing is that paper, even paper toweling, will rip off. It may get shredded a little. You might get a little piece of a paper stuck in the instrument, which could interfere with the way that the air flows through the instrument, and you don't want these bits of paper or pieces of paper and toweling hanging around. So when I teach, I always tell people it's very, very important, even though you can't see germs and bacteria, they still exist. We must keep things clean. I also rub down all of the tables that the instruments are laying on. Anything that I can think of that will make things sanitized, I do. I know that in some churches they use a preparation where they wipe off the pews and so forth, so when people come in, it'll be more disinfected and it'll be less likely for them to catch colds and so forth. So I just want to take a few minutes and show you about this. If you take your alcohol and you take a soft cloth, you will, and I'll just do this. We have to be careful not to spill, but it won't be the end of the world if we do. Okay, so this is wet. This is sopping wet. Put this down. I put it in a little plate, so if it tips over, it's not going to run over the place. Now, when I take an instrument, usually what I'm taking is a recorder or a penny whistle or an instrument. I just rub over the mouthpiece. I don't try to get anything in the mouthpiece or in the labium. The reason being is you don't know how long it's going to be before it evaporates. If you do that, you don't want to have the students sucking up the fumes of alcohol. So I just do it on the outside only, getting it pretty wet, and basically around the mouthpiece. Since it's plastic, you don't have to worry as to what it's going to do. Then I can rub it down by where the finger holes are, and even in the back, because the hands go both in the back and the front. And that's the way this instrument will be sanitized. Now with alcohol, it's going to dry quickly. So if I leave like maybe 10 or 15 minutes between each class, I may not have the luxury of doing that, but if I can, I try to leave a few minutes, let it dry, and do it again. Now if a child is sick, whoops. If a child, oh, here's a plastic one. So the same thing, the labium, do it around the mouthpiece. Don't try to get anything in the labium or in the slit where the mouthpiece goes. It's plastic. Alcohol will do it no harm at all. Rub it down both sides, and it's sanitized. You don't have to have a lot of alcohol to kill germs, but I like to sop it up a little bit with the instruments where it won't hurt. You cannot use alcohol on wood, so we place this back here. One reason that I don't ever buy wooden instruments for students is the fact that if you put alcohol on wood, it'll split the wood. Another thing you must never do, you must never put instruments in hot water or boiling water. I know a man who did it. I was supposed to be teaching in his school, and I went in. He says, oh, by the way, I disinfected the instruments, but they came out funny. Well, what he'd done is he'd take flutophones, and he'd put them in a pot of boiling water. And they came out distorted and twisted and half melted. You can't use hot water on plastics. You can't use boiling water on anything. You have to depend upon your alcohol or maybe some other substance that you might use, but you never use anything like that on wood, And here's another wood recorder. You know, you never put anything on that's going to crack the wood. Alcohol, if I put alcohol, would make a split right in the block, and you probably wouldn't be able to use the instrument. There would be notes that it wouldn't be able to get. So that's the reason I do not order anything that's wood. I order only plastic or metal. Now there are some instruments that you have that are wood that you have to buy, blocks and things like that. But those instruments don't go in the student's mouth. You can always have the children wash their hands, especially if they've been ill, to wash their hands, and you also can use hand sanitizer, and that's helpful as well. If you're going to be cleaning a keyboard, a piano, then you can use warm water with sometimes mild soap and just go over the keys. Or sometimes you might use a little bit of vinegar in warm water. Very damp. Don't sop up a cloth like I did that one. Just a very, very damp cloth. There's not much left on this anyway. And so just rub it down. Each key rub down. Be careful not to get liquid in between where the keys are. The keys are indented, and you have electronics in here. This is a keyboard. There are electronics in this instrument. It runs by battery, but you have to make sure that you don't do any damage. And so you just rub down each key gently with just a very, very damp cloth, not sopped up, just barely wet and warm, and with maybe a little vinegar or a little soap. If you use soap, you're going to have to go over it again with another damp cloth to take the soap off. You don't want the soap staying there. If you use a little vinegar, it might not harm to go over it again, but you don't have to make that much work of it. But keyboards is special. You usually use keyboards in teaching. Now, if you want to do individual instruments, or if a child has an individual instrument he wants to bring in, his own, I've taught many recorder classes where a child has said, I've got my own at home, can I bring it in? And I always let them do that, but I always tell them, don't pass it around. It's your instrument. Don't pass it around, because you don't know if the child has been sick, or they have a cough, or they've got a cold or a sore throat, and they haven't sanitized that instrument. They've probably never thought of it. And so therefore, you don't want them handing that off to other students. If a student brings in his own instrument, he plays his own instrument, he does not hand off his instrument to somebody else. Because it's very easy for a child to say, hey, let me try yours, you try mine, you know, and it just isn't healthy to do that. So you have to teach some sanitation when you're doing this. If you are doing an individual instrument like the flute has 3 parts. You have the head joint, and when you take it off, you twist it off. And you can see this is a little dark. If I am to use alcohol on that, I would probably get a little bit of a residue. And you can always tell when it needs to be done. If it's hard to put the instrument together, it seems to want to stick some when you put it together, then it's time to use the rubbing alcohol on it. And you do all the way around here where the joints mix together, where they come together. And in the inside, there are no keys, there are no pads in this part of the flute. It is the head joint. So you don't have to worry about it. You can go inside and take a little cloth and go in. And also, of course, over the mouthpiece. That's the head joint. For the body of the instrument, which is the middle part of the instrument, I'm going to pull the whole thing apart. You would go in the inside where the joint goes together, right here in the inside, and you've already done this part, so that fits inside this. You go inside and rub with the alcohol. Here again, it has to be damp and not really sopped up, because you've got keys right here. You don't want the alcohol dripping down and hitting the keys, because if you do that, you can damage the pads, and that means you'll have to replace the pads, because once they get damaged, they won't hold the air in. They won't completely stop the air from flowing over those holes, and then you'll have to replace it. The same thing on this side. In the inside and on the outside where the joints meet. And be very, very careful of this one. If you do this one, there's a pad sitting right here. Just do the outer edge, not far in enough to hit the key. So if I can put my finger in here, about this much, just enough to get past this section. This section's done. The inside is done a little tiny bit, but you're not getting it to the point where you hit that pad. So about up to here, where they join. And then when you get to the foot joint, here you really don't have to do anything at the bottom. It's not joining anything, but I usually take it and just rub in the inside a little distance, not enough to go hit this pad. And for this one here, you have to go in the inside a little bit, and here again, you have to be very careful not to hit this pad. Alcohol is terrible on pads. Your purpose in cleaning it is to make it so that it moves together easily, because if it sticks, there's a residue on it, and you need to get that residue on so you don't have to fight to get the instruments together. I have actually seen students, I'm not going to do it, but I'll talk about it. It would be bad to do it. They just push the instrument in. They just push it in. Never do that with an instrument. They're delicate. I always take and I just twist it. Now this is going in easily. I'm twisting it, but you see it's very easy. I do not actually need to go in with alcohol and clean that. And with the foot joint, I imagine this will be just as easy. And it just slides right on without any trouble at all. You may have to adjust it a little bit for the comfort of your fingers, but it's all together. And of course you have to adjust the head joint so that the hole goes right in line with the place where you put your hands. Your hands are put here, and the hole in the mouthpiece has to be in line with that, which it isn't right now, but it will be in a minute. I have to take a look at it when I do it. So you keep, and then it's all ready to start playing. It's very easy to do. Now, other instruments are a little bit more complicated. If you have a clarinet, which is made out of wood, you can't put alcohol on it. If you have a clarinet that's made out of wood, you need to oil that wood every so often, and you can buy special oils just made for wooden instruments. You cannot put alcohol on anything like this because it'll split, but you would be able to put alcohol on this recorder because it's plastic. It will not split. You have to know what the individual needs are of each instrument and adapt how you take care of it for that. Keeping an instrument clean is healthier for you. It's healthier for the instrument as well. Who wants to play an instrument that's dirty? Who wants to play an instrument that hasn't been cleaned up enough? And you learn how to take care of things. And I think it's important for children that you teach them about cleanliness, about how to disinfect instruments, about the fact of bacteria and microbes and so forth. You don't want to have them panic or anything like that, but you do want them to know that cleanliness is very important. It's important for the instruments. If you have the clarinet, the only thing you do, especially if it's made out of wood, if you need to take the mouthpiece off, which you normally would anyway to put it in its case. Take the reed off from the mouthpiece. You can use alcohol on the plastic mouthpiece. You cannot get alcohol on the reed. So take the reed off. You just have the mouthpiece and nothing else, and then you go over the mouthpiece with a little bit of alcohol. Let it completely dry. You don't want any alcohol on that reed. Then you put the reed back on with the ligature, and then you can put it back on the instrument when you're ready to play it. You do have cork on clarinets and cork on saxophones as well. You don't want to put alcohol in the cork. You will get cork between the joints where the instruments go together. You do not have cork on a flute, but you do on the saxophones, you do on the clarinets. And so you can't use alcohol on cork. You just basically use it on the mouthpiece, and that's all. So you're limited in terms of sanitizing instruments, individual instruments, if the instrument has got a lot of pads, if it's got reed, if it's got cork, and so forth. But you can for children. Most of the time you're not teaching those instruments unless you're giving individual instruction. And if you're giving individual instruction, you will teach them what to do. But when you're teaching classes, what's happening is you get students coming in all day long, and they're using the same instruments over and over again. Make sure that the instrument is clean, disinfected, and you're not going to have there'll be less chance that you're going to have somebody coming up sick because they caught somebody else's cold because they use the same instrument. So you have to give yourself time to do that, and I think it's proper to teach students how to do it. Stand with them, teach them how, tell them that they can't be careless with it, they have to take their time, they have to go over the individual instrument, they have to go past the mouthpiece or across the mouthpiece, but not get alcohol in the mouthpiece, and then go down and wipe down by what's called the fingerboard. A fingerboard is where you put your fingers. That's what it's called. A keyboard is on a piano where you put your fingers, but any other instrument that's a woodwind, there's a place to put your fingers, and that's called the fingerboard. And then in the back where the thumbs are, and get that really clean and teach them how to do it and let them do it. It's worth taking up some class time so that they will know how. Then when they continue to learn instruments on their own, they'll be able to keep them clean and disinfected. If a child is sick, they should not be going to school and playing instruments, because the first thing they do is they're coughing, they're sneezing, they're putting their hands up to their mouth, then their hands go either on a keyboard or a piano or an instrument. This is why I suggest a little bit of vinegar and going over every key. But if they're sick, they should not be playing an instrument because everybody else is using the same instrument, and you do the best that you can to keep things sanitized. I think you can cut down a lot on illnesses, but you may not be able to stop them completely. So if a child is ill, they should not play. I can remember when I was teaching at a fine arts center, and a little girl was taking flute lessons, and she loved her flute lessons, and she was sick with a bad cold, and she wanted to come. And fortunately for me, her mother called me and said, should I bring her in? Well, I was scheduled to have open heart surgery 3 weeks later, and the last thing I needed was a cold that could disrupt the whole surgery schedule. And so I told her that she could not come in because I was going to have surgery and I did not want to catch anything. And she was disappointed, so what I did was I promised I'd give her an extra lesson later on to make up for it, which of course I did. If you make a promise, you've got to keep it. Otherwise, a child will not learn to trust you. So I think that's about as far as we can go today. Instruments can be clean. They're delightful to play. You will feel more comfortable if you're playing a clean instrument, and you need how to disinfect an instrument in the correct manner so you don't damage the instrument, but you protect it. And it's just a case of knowing what to do and when. And so I guess I'll close for now. Our time is almost up. Please join me next time, and we'll be answering some more questions.